Okay, so for the video, I may pretend there's people over here. I'll create the illusion that there are more people here. Let's see. Well, this is just about the same count as last time.
Yeah, this is good. Yeah.
Okay, let's have a word of prayer before we begin. Lord, we do thank you for our time together, and I pray that you'll enlighten us and help us to understand these virtues so that we can live better. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay, so from the intro last week, we have the cardinal virtues, followed by the theological virtues, followed by the heavenly virtues. So we begin tonight with the cardinal virtues, and the name of the first one that we have is prudence. Do you use the word prudent in your vocabulary normally?
No,
It's
not
kind
very
of old-fashioned.
It's kind of
I
old-fashioned.
remember it from movies, like in the westerns.
Indeed, so we don't, it's not a term that we use very often, but maybe an hour from now you'll embrace prudence and use it. Okay, so you have the handout sheet there, and the second bullet point, no matter what, adhering to rules is much easier than exercising wisdom. Now, think of prudence as practical wisdom, okay? And in our book, she talks about kind of two different kinds of wisdom. One is, I would term kind of theoretical wisdom, and then prudence is practical wisdom. This is just the day-to-day stuff that we deal with, okay? So it's normal stuff. And implicit in her statement is that it's different than simply following rules, right? So it's not, the idea of prudence is not just adhering to this set of rules, it's using practical wisdom, all right? Prudence is an intellectual virtue, a virtue related to knowing. Now, I talked a little bit last week about God having providence. He's way up here, not where we are. He knows everything. He has all power. He has providence. In the animal kingdom, they just have instinct. They don't think about what they did yesterday. They don't plan for what they're going to do tomorrow.
No conscience.
No conscience.
Grasshoppers.
We'll be talking about grasshoppers, right? And we're in between there. And the providence, instinct, and we operate with prudence. Okay, so prudence is sort of like providence in that the idea of prudence is the ability to think about what's going to happen, right? So if I drive 90 miles an hour from here to Dallas, I will probably get someone's attention. I shouldn't do that. I should just drive the speed limit, and that'll simplify my life, right? So that's just practical. So there's a level of which that's kind of what prudence is. Just thinking about the consequences of what we're going to do. So I pulled a paragraph out of the book, which is kind of convoluted, so I'll interpret it for you. It's at the bottom of page 1. Prudence concerns the realities of a life lived within a specific and communal history, wisdom which proceeds to act. It is exercised within a mix of specific relations and goods that give the moral life of any person its texture. Hence, prudence responds specifically to the concrete particularities of one's life. In other words, applying wisdom requires the ability to discern truth and then to act rightly based on the truth. Okay, the last sentence is self-explanatory. Discern the truth and then act based on that truth. Now the first part of that, here's my interpretation of that. That you are faced with a particular set of circumstances, and that is the framework of your decisions. Okay? Because what we're talking about is the things you and I do. We're not going to talk about what Kim Jong-un is thinking about. That's his world, not our world. Okay? So this is, we can just kind of focus on the things we do and need to do from day to day. Okay? Now that second paragraph, for a person to exercise prudence, it is implicit that his motives are for the good. Okay? So, what would not be that? And so I think about movie plots where the clever criminal hatches an elaborate plot where he foresees every contingency to commit the crime. The perfect crime. This bad actor has used the skills of prudence to a bad end. He isn't prudence, he's merely clever. Okay, so when you're defining prudence in your own mind and trying to apply it in your day-to-day life, it must have a good end to it. Okay? And that's because if your purpose is not good, you're just going to be clever. We don't need to be clever, we need to be prudent. So I have a quote here from Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and he pretty well defines it the same way. Prudence means practical common sense, taking the trouble to think out what you are doing and what is likely to come of it. Okay, and that's a absolutely adequate definition. And this is, if you've lived this long as we have, we had to be somewhat prudent along the way, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, snickered.
yeah. A day you weren't prudent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. But there again, see, you had the experience which you learned from, and then we can see your experience and learn from it as well.
True, I haven't done that since.
There's the perfect example of prudence. Lewis went on to talk about, said God is no fonder of intellectual slackers than of any other slackers. So in terms of exercising prudence, it takes effort to be prudent, because I have a couple of choices here, which is the better path to follow. And then he goes on to say, that is why an uneducated believer like Bunyan was able to write a book that has astonished the world. And the person he's talking about is John Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress, a book which we've studied, and there's a lot of prudence in that book as well. Okay, so I came up with, I've got a couple of examples, and then I'll refer to a couple of stories as well. So one example I came up with respect to prudence is like when it's election time. Okay? So my thought is that no one on that ballot is going to be perfect. They won't be. But prudence says to figure out who's the best person and vote for them. To sit out the election is not prudent. Okay, because the good is to get the best person in there. And so if you simply say, well, heck with it, I'm not gonna play, that might feel good, but it would not fit the category of prudence. Okay? I came up with another example. Young man starts a family, and then, how does he, among the many ways he takes care of his family, one thing he can do is buy life insurance, right?
First
Because,
select the good mate that you think will be good.
what's that?
First, to be prudent is how to select your mate.
Yeah.
No.
But I'm picking up the story where he is married.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm saying he has a family.
It's already too late for him.
So, I mean, this is a thing he can do, such that, if he's unable to go to work, if he, were killed or something, then he's providing for his family, okay? So that's a prudent thing to do, right? Because the intent is good, the end of it all is good, that his family is provided for, and so that's an example of prudence, right? So I've got for you here, everybody knows Aesop's fables, right?
Which one?
Plural. The fables. So there's I think I put it on that very first handout, that there's it's the Library of Congress has all these Aesop's fables laid out. So you just roll from one to the next. So it's a handy way to find them. So you know the one about the ant and the grasshopper? It's one page, I'll read it to you. One bright day in late autumn, a family of ants were bustling about in the warm sunshine, drying out the grain they had stored up during the summer. When a starving grasshopper, his fiddle under his arm, came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat. "What?" cried the ants in surprise. "Haven't you stored anything away for the winter? What in the world were you doing all last summer?" "I didn't have time to store up any food," whined the grasshopper. "I was so busy making music that before I knew it, the summer was gone." The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. "Making music, were you?" they cried. "Very well, now dance." And they turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their work. Okay, so this is very basic, right? The ants were busy preparing for the winter. The grasshopper was not. Okay, so there's a sense in which, that prudence is, it can be that straightforward.
Justice.
Well, we'll get to that in a couple of weeks.
So
And,
is a prepper prudent?
What's that?
Is a prepper prudent?
Well, if it comes true.
But they go to the extreme.
But it's an excellent question, because, see, the prepper he would make the case. Well, I am ready when all these bad things happen. And now this is where, when we're talking about practical wisdom,
He uses his prudence to dodge all the things that would bring him to need his insurance.
But on the flip side of that, if you are too much that way, are you trusting God?
oh, well, see, but see, these are the adult questions that we should be grappling with from day to day. This is what we ought to think through. Don't come here for easy answers.
We should not be consumed of being a prepper. You can do something, for the future, but not the extreme.
Not the extreme, yes.
Well, I guess you always have to keep in mind, what you're seeking first. And God said, seek the kingdom, his kingdom first.
Mhm.
And he said, then all these other things will be supplied to you. But, you know, we do have to
Right, but
seek
that,
his.
that does not exempt us from changing the oil in our car.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, it's
Mhm.
to simply try to live in this super spiritual world where I don't have to worry about anything. That's
Oh,
that's
well,
not
yeah,
that's
and
not
I think
correct.
that, well, and I think with the sermon that he gave us is priorities. You know, you have to do all these things, but be sure and put me first on your list.
Mhm.
Start out with me and my will, and then your day will go much easier as you have to forage for food and shelter and everything else.
Here's another one I thought about. I don't know how prevalent it is now, but you know, I know there was and probably perhaps still is this trend of, you know, little boys that won't sit still in school, and the doctor fills them full of pills to get them to calm down. Not prudent.
I would spank their honey.
You know,
That's the best way.
it's expedient. Well, I want him to sit down today, so I'm gonna give him some medication, but that doesn't
Yeah, but not
help him in the
zombies.
long term.
Yeah.
You know, in the long term, you know, he needs to outgrow it, he needs some self-discipline, he needs enough structure to get him focused.
It might be not prudent to make that 100% statement.
To be sure, but
I mean, I think there are some that do require intervention
yeah,
medicines.
I think
that's always the case.
if we had taken our son to the doctor, they would have given him pills. When he was,
I just saw a thing on the internet, reading the news, there's a church school that's in trouble because they had so many kids acting up that they mandated that they walk with their hands behind them. And if they say anything, it has to be pertaining to the lessons that they have been teaching that day. They can't just talk about anything. And the only time they're allowed not to have their hand behind them is when they're walking up and down stairs for balance.
Mhm.
And the parents are up in arms.
Yeah,
It's not extreme to
It's,
me.
you know, it's,
yeah, yeah. But where's the right amount, etc. Which leads me to another example I thought about, and when we go back a few years to the COVID response that we went through. You know, a lot of it mandated by the federal government, state government. You know, our church didn't meet for weeks on end as part of this COVID response. And you remember the things they said to us at the time? Well, if it just saves one life, it's worth it. You know, so people couldn't go to work, people had to close their businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So there was, you know, they embraced the good of saving this one life, was kind of the terminology they used.
Versus shutting down the economy.
And so in retrospect, you know, I think that was, it was an unbalanced response. You know, just everyone locked themselves away, and then it'll all be better in a couple of weeks.
Is there a verse in the Bible that tells us a balance rather than extremism, other than what Laura said, other than priorities? A verse in the Bible that tells us balance, a balance of things rather, other than priorities, that not to go to extremes. I mean, you know, we all know extremes are bad.
I don't know, but if you focus on God and put Him as the priority, then your decisions will be right. I mean,
Well, of course, the
obedience.
one where, be not drunk with wine where it's excess, but be filled with the Spirit, and in all things, do moderation. And, Paul, you know, he says, all things are lawful for me if I am in God's will.
So would you
And he
interpret that
says,
as
but
moderation?
he, no, but he says, but all things are not expedient. And that means all things are not profitable to me and everyone around. So for that way, see, then he exercises prudence for his example to his fellow believers. See, because he said he refused to eat food offered to idols because it offended some of the new Christians who were pulling away from that idol worship. And they couldn't grasp, you know, how Paul could say, meat's meat. I don't care, you know, because that idol, it's not a god.
Right.
You know, it's nothing. It's
Right.
not alive. And so it did not offend his conscience, but because it would offend a fellow believer's conscience, he would absolutely abstain.
So like a stumbling block.
Yeah.
The verse
And
says
so
stumbling block.
there's lots of things where we, you know, in all things, you know, we should use moderation. And I will look up some verses for you.
Now, the other thing is, as we go through these, you know, we slice the pie up, and we try to focus on one particular thing each week. But it really all fits together. Okay, so we're not, you know, this class is not all about prudence and being preppers. I mean, you know, we should exercise prudence, but there are other things that factor in. Okay, so again, we're just kind of defining what it is and focusing on this week, and then we're going to have a little more to work with as the weeks go by. Okay. There's a great story written by Jack London titled "To Build a Fire." And the story I remember the barber shop I was sitting in when I read the story in like Field and Stream magazine or something. I mean, it is a powerful story, and it's quite the adventure type thing. And I won't spoil it for you, but I recommend it. But it's a great example of imprudence. So it's the opposite of prudence. So, you know, Jack London wrote a lot of stories about prospecting in Alaska, you know, Call of the Wild, stuff like that. So this fellow is going to leave this trading post in the morning and walk to the cabin where his fellow miners are, gold prospectors. And the guy at the trading post says, "Don't go, it's too cold." And this guy said, "Nah, not for me." And that's as much as I'll tell you about it. But it's a great story which is worth reading, and it's, you know, just imprudence upon imprudence, and you see where it got him. Oh, back to COVID, they stopped Beach Club.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. Beach Club that. There's another book I'll tell you about, and it's really a series of books. And the very first, and my point at this point is to kind of expand this idea of prudence, because what I've talked about so far sort of is it focuses on, you know, like personal safety and, you know, preserving your car by doing oil changes and stuff like that. So it's sort of you could glean from that, well, it's all about just taking the safe course of action.
Risk assessment.
Risk assessment, right, which, you know, we hear a lot about in the workplace now. So, and so I want to kind of expand this with the focus on the good finding the good and doing the good. So I think we all would agree that the COVID response was not perfect because it did some good in that, no doubt some lives were saved, but there was a whole lot of negative consequences to that. So part of prudence is to try to see the bigger picture and to find that good. Which gets us to another book I'll tell you about. I had a copy of this and I probably loaned it or gave it away. But the book is titled Swallows and Amazons. And it's the first of about a 12-book series. And the author is Arthur Ransom. Ransom with an E on the end. And these books are absolutely worth reading just because they're a pleasure to read. Okay? Because I don't want to promote the idea of read this to learn a lesson from it. Right? Because that's, we should read for pleasure. And these are pleasant books to read. So the setting is in England, and there's a family that's on their summer holiday. And so this is the wife and a bunch of kids, and they go up to spend the summer with this family by this big lake. The husband is in the Royal Navy, and he's deployed somewhere. And they've been to this place before, and the kids want to use this boat, this sailboat. And the boat's called the Swallow, which is where we get Swallows and Amazons in the title. So they're pleading with mom, hey, we want to use the boat, go out on the lake, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, mom sends a telegram to dad to see what he says, okay? Because on the one hand, and these kids are like, I would say like 13 down to 5 or something, brothers and sisters. Now, on one level, prudence says, no way, you're going out on that lake by yourself, right? And if you just focus on the safety kind of stuff, right? And that makes sense to me. Water can be a very dangerous place. So they send this telegram to the dad. Hey, mom says, can the kids do this? And he comes back, in telegrams, the movies and stuff, it's always a short answer, right? Minimum number of words. So I'll define the word. He uses the word duffer. And so when I say duffer, just think of knucklehead. Okay? And so these are parents trying to raise their kids. Okay? Bigger context than just safety. He said, better drowned than duffers. If not, duffers won't drown. So I'll substitute knucklehead. Better drowned than being knuckleheads. If they're not knuckleheads, they won't drown. Okay. So my point is to expand this definition of the good. The parents want to raise good kids, competent kids, etc. So it kind of goes to an extreme. Well, I'd rather have them drown than be. I don't want my kids to be knuckleheads, so I just assume them drown, which is harsh, of course, and a bit of hyperbole there. But I hope you get my point that okay, well, yes, there's a certain risk to this, but by them engaging in what might be considered risky behavior, they'll come out better on the other side. Does that make sense? Now I know when I was growing up, I had all manner of freedom. And my grandkids don't. They're kind of stuck in the house. And See, I'm of the opinion that's not so good for them to be confined and protected from everything. Okay, so I hope I'm coming across correctly where there's more to the good than just being safe tomorrow. You know, there are other goods that can factor in when you're thinking about prudence. Okay, does that?
Yeah, I think, you know, that protected.
Kind of like learning wisdom.
Learning wisdom, that's right. And in the stories themselves, so the oldest brother is the captain. You know, they treat this little sailboat like a ship, and the big sister is the chief mate, and then there's the two littler kids. You know, the ship's boy and I don't know, whatever. But they create all this structure. You know, their dad's in the Navy, and so they carry all this stuff over. And as you read it, and as they go about their business, because they get permission to go, they take this boat and they camp out on this island, but they demonstrate prudence continuously, because the chief mate's worried that they got to get fed. You know, where's the supplies? What are we going to have for lunch today? And the mom arranged for them to take the boat over to someplace to get milk every day. And so a lot of stuff was organized for them. But it is just a really fun book to read. And, you know, in reading it, I mean, it will take you back to your childhood. You know, I mean, it's kind of a transformative story in that respect.
Is that a movie?
There is a movie, in fact. So I looked at it just this week. It's on Amazon Prime. It's called Swallows and Amazons. Now, the story they tell is way different than the book. Many of the characters are the same. And it's a pretty good movie, but if you watch the movie and read you know, the book is, I mean, the movie has spies and stuff in it. Okay, so they create a whole bunch of drama that's not in the book, because the book is just mostly routine kids doing routine kid stuff. And they have their imaginative thing going on, and but it's really good. Okay, Tom, what's the time check? Time check?
6:03.
6:03. Okay, we have plenty of time. Okay, are we good so far? I know I'm kind of going far afield with some of this stuff, and you know, like this. The first couple of times I did this, I was kind of focused more on the prudence / safety thing. Okay, just think about what's going to happen and choose the best course. And that's completely valid, but prudence can help you see the bigger picture and find the greater good. Okay? So, in our book, Dr. Pryor suggests a book to read called Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. And this book goes back to the 1700s or something. And I haven't read the book, but go to Amazon Prime and you can watch the movie. So apparently it's a rather thick book, because there are 6 hours. It's like a mini series. Okay? And the first warning I'll give you, it is adult viewing. I mean, this is an adult type stuff. So don't think you're going to teach your grandkids about prudence by watching this, because you know, The Ant and the Grasshopper is a very simple, straightforward story, and it illustrates prudence. Tom Jones is much more complex, but it really addresses this greater good and how it takes effort to find the good and then to pull it off. So Tom Jones appears to this, he shows up in this gentleman's home. I mean, this is like the lords and ladies kind of thing, okay? So this guy's got the big manor, and he has the name Allworthy. So this older guy he is all-worthy. He's a good guy. So like throughout the movie, if you watch it, you know, he pretty well makes good choices all the way along. Well, the little baby, he takes him in, doesn't really adopt him per se, but he provides for the kid through his life. And so we watch him go from a baby to a boy to a young man, and so essentially, if you watch this thing, you're going to see Tom he's going to stumble and do all sorts of silly things. And along the way, his benefactor, Allworthy, says, Tom, you need some prudence. So I mean, in terms of the vernacular of the virtues, you know, you will see it in this movie if you watch it, okay? And again, it's the other thing I'll warn you about the movie, and this is true in the book also, is that there's a narrator who pops up all the time and interjects things. And Dr. Pryor warns us in her book that you can't always take the narrator at face value, okay? So there's some complexities to the story. So I'm taking my second run at the movies, to the TV show and try to, understand it a little better. But if in one sense, if you view prudence as just, okay, I'm going to avoid cutting my finger again, and I'm not, and I'm going to obey the speed limit. I mean, I think that's perfectly adequate. But if, when your life becomes, you can view it in a more comprehensive and complex level, well, what is the good? Like in Swallows and Amazons, the dad is willing for his kids to engage in, behavior you wouldn't want your grandkids doing it, because I wouldn't let my grandkids do what they did, because it was just it's too much. But
What about your kids?
Those are different.
well, I mean, but I mean, see, these were kids, camping out overnight and taking a boat out on a lake and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I
You
wouldn't have.
let your grandkids do it, but would you let your kids do
No.
it? Okay.
No, but it's, again, it's a story, and I don't know that it actually happened or not. But in terms of, as you read the story, again, just let it take you back to when you were a kid, and the sort of activities you engaged in, and the make-believe world you created. So it's.
We get a whipping if we did something like that, probably go without,
They're trying to teach you prudence. Did that happen often, Don? You don't have to answer.
Prudence is not exempt from making mistakes. To learn from, to carry on.
Right.
We get chased.
Okay, time check? Time check?
Yeah, that's it.
6:10.
6:10, okay, I got 5 minutes. Okay.
Well, and I guess my one thing about with kids, what you would let them do. Now I know there's a threshold. See, now I think these kids were a little young for some of those adventures. I think it would maybe not been on a boat on the water, but in an area around. Because I know when we, 14, 15, 16, we had the woods. I mean, my brother went out and camped out with his friend in the woods and went out there and they were killing armadillos
Right,
and roasting them and eating them.
Right, and
they
it's,
were having a great time.
and it's a loss that,
Yeah.
modern kids don't get to do those sorts of things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the criteria, sometimes being prudent is your children or anyone physically and mentally capable of taking care of themselves at a while, why do we send our kids to camp? So that, get them out of the house and out, and
Yeah.
where they just have a supervisor and you gotta walk places
Right.
and do and
We don't-
be in the woods.
We don't have as many crazy people back then.
Well, that's
Yeah.
true,
Yeah.
that's true.
So
See, that's what I'm
prudence
saying. Yeah,
requires that
yeah,
we don't,
yeah.
we have good reasons
I
not
think
to
you
let our
might be
kids.
wrong about that. I think it was not publicized as much.
You think so, Dorothy?
Yeah.
And in my childhood, looking back on it, there were just as many bad things going on. We just did not hear about it.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
modern
that's-
And
culture.
one other thing I was thinking about when I was asking my daughter about getting Sesame Street, the old Sesame Street things on DVD, or well, actually it was on tape then, for the kids to watch, and she said, well, those things are not really appropriate for the kids to do now. Like in Sesame Street, the kids would go to construction sites
Yes, that's
and go
true.
to strangers and all.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah,
Anyway, it changes.
yeah, but,
Yeah, that's true.
but again, but as parents, grandparents, adults, we should also look at more aspects of the good than simply that they never stubbed their toe. Oh man, I watched my grandson. He cut his finger or something. You know what? It's like he's 12. It's the first time he ever cut his finger. See, it's good that they cut their finger before they're 10. That's the kind of good I'm talking about. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to, since we have a minute, I'll ask you to take one of these, and I'll just give you a quick intro, and maybe you can look at these before we meet next time. So this is just a quick intro to the heavenly virtues. Okay, and the reason that I'm going to do a quick intro today is that next week we're going to look at temperance, which is a cardinal virtue, but it is also a heavenly virtue. Okay? Now, the
Yeah, it's coming.
the heavenly virtues offset the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah, just one thing.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the heavenly virtues offset the 7 deadly sins. So the virtue that we're going to look at next week, which is temperance, that's the virtue that offsets gluttony. Okay? But the way she presented it in her book as a cardinal virtue, she didn't spend much time looking at the vice that goes with it. So here's just the quick blurb on the heavenly virtues. You've heard of the 7 deadly sins? Okay, I see a couple of nodding heads. Okay, and those popped up in Dante's poem called Purgatorio. Okay, purgatory. So, some folks embrace the idea of purgatory as a place. I don't think that there is a purgatory, but the idea of purgatory is useful to us for this reason. Purgatory comes from the word purge. Okay? So purgatory is a place where things get purged from souls. Okay? And what gets purged? The 7 deadly sins. So, as an example, the imagery of purgatory was that there's this island out in the ocean all by itself, and there are souls that are saved, but they're not quite ready to go into paradise yet. So the first level is they get purged of their pride, and they gain humility. And so people just walk around and around this little island with a big stone on their back. When you have a big stone on your back, you can't stand up and puff your chest out. And the imagery is that, you know, you were brought from pride to humility. Okay? So part of purgatory would be that people are purged of their gluttony in favor of temperance. Okay? So that's, again, I mean, that's all I'm advocating is to look at the imagery of purgatorio and see how we can apply it to ourselves. Because my viewpoint is that what should be taking place every day is that we purge ourselves. Okay? We should not be prideful. We should be humble. And next week we'll look at temperance, because we should embrace temperance because its opposite is gluttony. Okay? So I just want to introduce these concepts to you. And you can read through this, and maybe before we get started next week, you can pose many questions that this brings about.
Are you going to bring up Gilligan's Island later?
I might. What Tom's referring to is that I was looking for like a some sort of canned video thing of the virtues. It doesn't exist.
It's there for you to invent.
Is what?
It's there for you to invent.
It's there for me to invent, which is what I'm trying to do.
You can write.
Because what I did find is there was some video class like this related to the 7 deadly sins, and apparently it's based on Gilligan's Island, because each of the characters exhibited
Absolutely.
one of the 7 deadly sins. You know, the professor was proud because he was the only one who had any ability to do anything.
I always wondered how Skipper was able to get a boat. I mean,
it's Hollywood. Yeah. Okay, I'm sure that eats up the clock. Any last thoughts before we dismiss?
6:19.
Oh, I'm over time then. Okay.
I would think that this, when you see that little sign on the side of the road that says bridges may ice in cold weather, so, you know, if there's ice on the road, maybe I should slow down. Very few people do.
They were not prudent, even when they were warned. Okay, and there's an example of not prudence.
You can learn from it, if you will.
Okay, exactly. Okay, well, let's pray. Lord, we do thank you for our time together, and Lord, I pray that you'll help us to embrace prudence, help us to use it as a means to make good choices from day to day, so that we can find the good and do the good. In Jesus' name, amen.
Yeah.